I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parents, often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their roles. One thing I know from personal experience is being a lead dad is not a traditional role for men, whether you work full-time, part-time, or devote all your time to your family. Parenting is so often left to mothers or paid caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and create a community for fathers who are lead dads and to welcome other dads who want to learn from them. Today, my guest is Marvin Avilez, who has one of the most captivating stories about becoming a lead dad I've ever heard. Marvin and I met at a poker table in New York City probably 20 years ago when neither of us had kids, and playing poker until midnight on a weekday seemed like a perfectly good use of our time. We then lost touch for well over a decade until I started seeing him posting photos of him and his daughter on Facebook. After watching for a while, I started to read what was going on, but it was like starting a mystery novel on page 200. I was following, but it didn't all add up. So I reached out to Marvin this summer and we started to talk. Marvin is a former counter-intel Marine turned technologist who now lives in London. And when we had that first call, what was supposed to last about 15 minutes stretched for well over an hour. And I knew I wanted Marvin to tell his story on this podcast. Marvin, thanks for being here and welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Paul, thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Your story starts in 2010, at least for the purposes of this podcast. It starts in 2010 when you met the woman who would become your daughter's mother. At some point, you guys decided to have a child. What happened?
Yeah. And, we got pregnant, and the next thing you know, things started to fall apart during the pregnancy.
And by that, you mean relationship wise?
Yes. And there was a lot of difference in opinion as to where and how and when this child would be raised. And she was living in England. I, as you know, was living in New York, in Manhattan. And I found myself in a really uncomfortable, very surreal, very strange situation.
Yeah, you can't just hop in the car and drive there. It's a bit of a geographical conundrum. But your daughter was born in December 2015. That's when you became a dad. What was that process like? And what were those first couple months as a dad like for you and her?
Yeah, well, just to kind of add a little color to it before we go there, that prior to the birth, the relationship had fallen completely apart. And I was extremely, I don't know if it was strange. I was extremely fearful, but I think it was more that I was extremely facing the unknown. Like I didn't understand what was going on. I couldn't comprehend
what were you, but I mean, fatherhood is always that stuff in the unknown, but what were you fearful about? Were you fearful about this, what the end of the relationship meant, or for the fatherhood? Tell me more about that.
Like it's interesting, right? You think of events, and so she didn't want to see me, and there was some communication like, look, you're not going to be part of this child's life, and I was like, wait a minute, what is going on here? And so you would think, I started thinking about the actual like tactical aspect of what was going on. And okay, well, when is our child going to be born? And what's the name? And so I thought at that level, and I started getting advice. I started coming to England every month as much as possible. And I started to get advice from another organization called FNF, Families Need Fathers. And so it was a peer group program. But what I was realizing was I just couldn't comprehend this idea that I didn't exist. And moreover, there was somebody trying to prevent me from being involved in my potential child's life. That was the kind of part where it was really difficult to understand.
But this is, you were going back and forth from New York to the UK while she was still pregnant. Is that correct? So this is
Correct.
even
That's right.
before your daughter is born.
That's right. And that's where I started to I think for my sake, I very fortunately, I started mission planning. I was like, okay, this is what do. You start to develop a course of action, you start to develop various scenarios, and I just went into that mode. What I did and was taught in the Marine Corps, foreign country, navigating the proper culture and the legalities, and just really doing all of that work. And then I think what it came down to was it was this commitment that this wasn't going to be easy, that there was an opposing force, and I didn't have any answers, right, but I was going to continue moving forward towards this direction and figuring it out as it occurred, just trying to get to the corner and making the next decision as to should I go left or right.
Wow. And because, I mean, for listeners, I mean, you deployed in Iraq, correct?
Yeah, I did a conventional war, which was the invasion into Baghdad, and the workup the few months prior to that, and then I did some operations throughout the globe in counterintelligence prior to that.
Yeah, I mean, so this is your background, but again, I know from talking to people in the armed services. My first book, I ended up lecturing up at West Point. Planning is everything, but plans fail. But here you're going into something where there is, so much emotion. Not that there's emotion in war, but there's so much emotion. You're about to become a father. You feel like you're being shut out even before your daughter is born. You're in two different countries, separated by a 6-7 hour flight and an ocean. What happened when your daughter was born in December 2015? Did the plan shift? Did contact shift? When did you first get to see her?
Yeah. It was actually quite interesting because I didn't have visibility in a way that you would think that a father or a partner or, an expecting person would. And so I felt extremely uncomfortable because I didn't want to keep asking, like, hey, what's going on? Especially to someone who we had already entered the legal process. There had already been lawyers involved. And it was clear at that point. And I think that that's what was sobering for me, is that it was clear that I was not wanted, in the sense of, hey, fundamentally, you're not the father of this child type of thing. And it was very clear, messaging. And I think that the situation when I was told that our, daughter had arrived, that was very exciting. There's a regardless of what the situation is, it was very celebratory in my spirit. And I was also, there was other aspects of it that were very hard. It was embarrassing. I had to tell my family. Right. And that's embarrassing. It's like, look, I'm in a situation where my child has come to the planet, and her mother doesn't want me to be part of this life or a presence, so to speak. So we started going. There was positions in the legal framework, and there was very little contact, very limited contact. And I think that part of that limited contact was not necessarily on the mother's side. It was also because of the fact that, yes, I was going back and forth. And so I couldn't be here full time, so the logistical aspect and the fact that I didn't live in England was part of the challenge at that point.
When did you first hold her? When did you first meet her, your daughter?
I think it was February of 2016, if I remember correctly. Maybe
so almost
late January, maybe late January, but I think it was maybe late January or February. Yeah, if I kind of remember correctly.
2 to 3 months after she was born.
Yes.
What was that like, that moment?
Um, I don't really remember. I think I was more focused on the situation and mom versus trying to process the meeting her. And I don't remember specifically that memory. I remember a few other ones where it was a little bit later, maybe the second or the third meeting, where there was more animation. There was much more kind of like there was a gift exchange. Well, I brought some gifts, and there was some strange and surreal kind of like, I remember looking at my daughter and seeing the color of her skin. It was much more like mine, and again, the other part, which is actually, we all do this, right? Like, oh, you look like so and so, uncle right. This, and you have so and so's nose, or you have. So I think that again, you get into that.
Damn it! You got on Cynthia's toes. Damn it!
Right,
One thing I didn't.
It was exactly. So I do remember that. And again, through getting advice, I think it was remain as calm as possible. It's no longer about my opinion or my view or the mother's opinion, the mother's view. And this is interesting. This is where I started to really change.
Change in what sense?
I had to put aside my anger, and I had to reestablish the relationship with myself about what is valuable to me, like what is my value set. And I'm really glad that I have an amazing godfather who was a very big part of my life, because I didn't have a father growing up. But my godfather, who was the main the main man in my life, was in fact, he was the first person I told. I remember calling him from England, actually, when I met. Now, this is interesting. Now I remember when the first time I met my daughter, I called my godfather as soon as that was over, and I said to him, "Hey, this is what's going on." And I remember feeling strange but proud, right? Like, hey, you're the first person I'm going to call, and I felt sanctuary and love in that action of calling him. It was strange, right? Like, I was calling him to tell him about my situation, which is very complicated and complex.
Yes.
And of course, him being the wise man that he is, he was the one who was celebratory about it. And nobody cared. And here's the other part, right? Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the bad part. They're like, yeah, whatever.
You got a daughter.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, you're dad. Congratulations. All right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is where and to this day, I can proudly say that is the mindset shift that has, I think, helped me through the past the past 7 years.
But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, I wonder if that was a moment, talking to your godfather, if that was a moment that sort of normalized what was a difficult, fraught situation. You're like, okay, yeah, of all the other stuff that's going on, I am a dad. I have a daughter. This is, something to be celebrated.
Yeah. Well, this is the other interesting part. I think that this gets very emotional. I remember growing up and not knowing the word, in the sense, dad. Like, dad wasn't part of my vocabulary. Like, of course I knew the word, right? Yeah, right. But when you grow up not having a dad and not experiencing that on a regular basis, daily, weekly, whatever,
yeah, there
was this strange void that was being filled but also existed. Like, wait a minute, I'm a dad. Well, wait. Well, what's my job? How do I do it? Wait, I'm the one who's responsible. And even to this day, I still kind of feel this strange. And so I talk to a lot of other dads, and I'm like, hey, how do you feel? And what do you think? And so it's fascinating to kind of unpack what you start to experience for the first time as a right. first dad, especially when you didn't have a dad. And so
It's so interesting because, you know, for other people, if we had a good dad, we have a model. If we have a bad dad, we had a model, but you had a void. So there wasn't a dad. And so you're making it up as you go along. And you know, nobody gets trained. You got trained to be a counterintel Marine.
Right.
You know, you don't get trained to be a dad. And so you need to sort of cobble it together through either your own memories of your childhood, good or bad, or as you did, you know, other friends who are, you know, so they're experts because they're, you know, 3 years ahead of you on the fatherhood, you know.
No, they are. And so and what happened, this is the beauty about it. Again, I think I had a choice. I could stay on the angry side or I can stay on the celebratory side.
Right.
And again, I always go back to my godfather, and I always think about, because I remember calling him so many times saying, oh, now, you know, both, how did you do that for me? And then it made me appreciate much more the extra mile that my godfather went for me and my brother. Right. And I was like, wow. And I remember calling my godfather, my godmother, and saying, why did you do this? Like, why and how? And I've always said I love you, but I cannot believe what this is. And I can't thank you. I will never be able to thank you enough, because I realize now that you prepared me for what is happening right now.
Wow.
That was the realization. That was the epiphany, and amazing.
When did you, you know, those first couple years, what was it like, you know, seeing your daughter? Were you able to sort of establish a regular cadence of visiting with her, being with her, being, you know, her dad in person?
Right. Yeah. The first couple years were very challenging. Her mother and I couldn't agree. And because of that lack of agreement, you know, obviously my daughter lived with her mother. And so I was the one trying to make change, which is different when you have something and you don't want it to change.
Right.
And so how do you balance that with not getting angry, not getting frustrated, trying to communicate, you know, again, how do I bring solutions to the table when the surreal situation's like, what is going on?
Right.
Right. But maintaining a discipline, a maturity, and in fact, some way trying to be loving, but yet not overstepping your, you know, your grounds or what this is. That's what the first 3 years were about.
Yep. But then, you know, as I understand it, you're sort of making progress, you know, in 2019 and heading into 2020. But then a global pandemic happens, COVID-19 happens. What did that do to your ability to see your daughter? What did that do to, you know, plans that you had in place or any agreements you were working on?
Right. Yeah. For me, yeah. At that point, I had pretty much decided that I was going to. We weren't seeing eye to eye. We couldn't come to an agreement, and I was going to relocate to the UK. That was the at least my intention and what I had verbally communicated. And I remember leaving England. I would say, you know, maybe, I don't know, March 5th or March 6th of 2020. And then arriving in Manhattan, being there for a few days and being like, what's going
on here?
What's going on here?
That's strange.
This is what? And again, we're going through that surreal. Well, it was surreal on a global level, right? But Manhattan, I don't know if you remember, it started to go downhill, and it started to go downhill fast.
Right.
Oh,
yeah. And it was literally the epicenter of it. You know, you sort of that outbreak in Seattle, and then it's really in that beginning concentrated in, you know, New York City and kind of the surrounding, you know, suburban towns.
Right. And that's when, unfortunately, I came down with COVID on the first days. And it was, again, probably the first time since the invasion in Iraq where I had very delusions and a lot of, a big sense of being lost, and kind of remembering back, like the air raid sirens going off and all of these kind of like memories of being in the invasion, because all I could hear was ambulance sirens, and I was stuck in this small apartment with one other person, and we made the best of it, but it's just a strange, as you remember, it's just a strange thing. And then when I got sick, of course, not knowing what was going to happen. And so I remember just telling my daughter's mother, like, look, I'm sick. I think we should stop talking. I'll get back to you when I'm better, because I just needed to, lay down and sleep, and my fever had gone up. I lost sense of smell and taste, and I just had all the symptoms, and clearly I felt horrible.
How long?
And she's like,
sick?
I was sick for a good 10 days. I had a solid case, but it never got into the lungs in the way, that was the tell, right?
Yeah.
If you were losing breathing. But I remember, I don't know if it was what it was, but I remember her mother saying, hey, take care of yourself, over text. And, that's kind of all you want to hear. It doesn't matter who it is. It's like, doesn't matter who it's from.
Gosh. So you get better, but that summer, there's no international travel. When does travel to London open up again, and when are you able to go?
Yeah, so we were doing video calls.
Oh, okay.
And I remember trying my best to keep a 3-year-old entertained on video calls. And there was one thing I did that was really interesting. And I mention it because it's something that's true still till today. But I started making coffee at home, because we didn't really leave the house, right? There wasn't many places open, and so I started grinding my beans at home, and she would watch.
That's funny. And
not that I was a big coffee achiever,
no, but like the machine, and the noise and the beans swirling around.
Yes, exactly, and to this day, that's a big part of our ritual. It's a big part.
Yeah. I remember rituals are important. Traditions are important. Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting story when I was like, okay, I got better, but it wasn't like I got better. It was, I don't have a fever. I don't, I'm not, I can move, but it wasn't that I was like, okay, I'm ready to go run a marathon. No, I was really, really not myself.
Right.
Lost a ton of weight, lost a lot of muscle mass, couldn't really figure out what was going on. I was like, who am I? I didn't get sense or smell back for a while. I just felt very tired all the time. So what we call long COVID is what I definitely had. I had it for, a good 6-7 months after. And during that period of time, I just had to figure out what was going on. Again, the world was spinning. And so what I did is I gave away a ton of my stuff. I packed stuff, and I bought a one-way ticket to England.
Mm-hmm. This is, this story is incredible throughout, but this is such an amazing story. How did you tell us? I know the answer, but how did you you literally talked your way into.
I literally talked my way.
How did that work? This is like counter intel Marine training, like 405. This isn't the 101 class. This is like the top. How do you do this?
Well, first of all, I didn't.
Hello, I'm Marvin. We're in a global pandemic. I'm here from New York. I would like to stay. How does that even happen? How does that?
First of all, getting a flight, right? How do you get a flight? Right. And I was able to find a flight through Portugal. Had the flight to the Azores. Again, full mask on the entire time, right? And had to do a layover there, believe it or not. Had to do a layover. And then from there, flew to London Gatwick. Yeah. I remember getting off, and I think I had two duffel military, one military type and one bigger bag. So again, my entire world, and a box and a bin. Yeah, a plastic bin that I had for files and whatnot. So really minimal stuff, all important papers and some photos, and then my American cast iron pan, which the lodge, my lodge cast iron pan, which I love because I love cooking. So I'm like, I'm not going to leave.
What
this
if I
behind.
can't get that in the UK? It's seasoned. It's seasoned. I've had it for all these years, and it takes a long time to season these things.
And there's part of that story too. Getting to customs, and then being, they weren't doing an interrogation, but there was a line of question, like, what are you doing here? And then I'm like, well, I'm here to see I'm here. My daughter lives here. Like, oh, well, what does she do? I'm like, well, no.
She plays a block. She watches
right.
coffee.
Exactly. And they're like, well, okay, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm moving. I'm immigrating. And he's like, oh, no, you can't. You're going to have to go back to the States. I'm like, excuse me? And so can you imagine, right? I'm like, he's like, you can't, because you cannot apply for citizenship while you are here. You have to do that from the country of origin. And so I'm like, whoa, wait, hold on. I go, look, I think that there's, some confusion. And he's like, well, where are you going to stay? And I said, well, I had already rented a flat. I had a flat here. And I had a flat because I was able to rent one for 6 months as a visitor and not a resident. And I paid 6 months up front, and fortunately the landlord rented it because I came with my daughter, and he met us both, and he's like, oh, definitely we'll help you out. So I'm just, my jaw's falling at the border with border control telling me I can't come in. Yeah. I have to go back to the States. You have to apply and wait for an answer. And I said, well, I do have an agreement for contact. And I pulled that out, and he reads it. He's like, well, this is, you still can't apply. And, then he starts asking me about how much money do I have, and what about healthcare, and just kind of going up and down the line. And I was like, look, my daughter is whatever she was at the time. I can't remember, 3.5 or 4. Yeah. I'm either going to come in, and you're going to let me come in, and I'm allowed to do that on a 6-month visa. And whether or not I apply or not is speculative.
Right. Yeah.
right. Like, and he goes, but you just told me you were going to. I said, yes, but, who knows what's really going to happen, because the fact of the matter is the world's upside down. And I kind of just started, to kind of noise, and
you pulled out your skillet. You're like, and I got this. You don't have this. Would you? Can I trade?
I got my lodge cast iron pan. And he goes, look, I don't know what's going on. You seem like a nice guy, but I'm telling you what the law is. Welcome to the UK. And he stamped it, and he let me through. And that's all I care. That's all I cared about. I was like, look, just get on the other side.
That was the end of part 1. Please tune in next week to listen to part 2 of my conversation with Marvin Avilez.